Another fairly recent story that was talked about a lot in the Catholic world was when Joe Biden visited the Pope. And once again, there was all this talk about, I mean, Joe Biden, or his team at least, claimed that the Pope had said he was, I think Joe Biden actually claimed it himself. The Pope told him he was a very good Catholic, he should keep going to communion. People never heard the Pope say this, but they just kind of, this is what Joe Biden said happened. And then once again, people were thinking, should the Pope have done more to reprimand Joe Biden? Then there was all this talk about, I know there's a lot going on in the USA with the bishops sort of deciding whether they should actually be writing something up to say that you cannot go to communion if you are a politician who's actively pro-abortion. What did you make of that whole thing with Joe Biden?
Well, first of all, to put it bluntly, Biden is senile. We actually have a situation in which the leader of the Western world is not in all his right faculties. I mean, that brings its own problems. And so therefore, it doesn't mean that he was deliberately distorting what the Pope said. You know, it just means he didn't really take on board any nuances. Obviously, the Vatican is a state in its own right, and therefore it practices diplomacy. And you are not going to receive the head of the United States and deliberately antagonize him. But nevertheless, I think, yes, if you are a politician who is actively supporting the destruction of unborn children, and you are doing that actively, then I think that probably should be a cause to say, well, you know, you better stop taking communion. You're not part of the church.
So you think that the bishop should actively refuse communion to politicians?
The fact is, priests do not cause scandal or offence, and if somebody presents at the communion table, I mean, even if they were a divorced and remarried Catholic who appear to be singled out for this treatment, whereas, you know, any murderer can go up to the communion, the priests do not actually refuse communion if you ask for it, and therefore if a politician defies the bishop's ruling, goes up and seeks communion, he'll get it. So I think rather than say, you know, put the onus on the priests and say you must refuse communion, it would be far better for the bishops to say you should not be seeking communion, and just leave it like that. And inevitably that will lead to the sort of banner headlines which you always get about excommunication, you know, taking us back to medieval times. So it needs to be explained quite carefully. But that is what I would say. I mean, I would say to politicians who are promoting abortion, I would say to them, you know, you are promoting a position that the church condemns. Now, I do not want that distorted as being Widdecombe calls for the excommunication of all pro-abortion Catholic MPs. I do not. But I think the church should be taking a much stronger line towards them. It's the fact that the church doesn't do that which allows them really to get away with quite a lot.
Now, just going back briefly, because when you talked about the reasons you left the Anglican Church, and that there were just too many straws at one point, and then there was a final straw that caused you to do it. Obviously, we ourselves in the Catholic Church have had this, you know, horrific situation with the sexual abuse scandals. Some people even saw that as, for them, the final straw to leave the Catholic Church. Did that ever make you think, had you made the right choice? And what was it that made you not leave despite these kind of things happening?
I saw them as no reason to leave at all. First of all, let's get a sense of proportion into this. You would think from the publicity that every other priest was a paedophile. If you actually look, when it all shook down, even after the scandals in America and the scandals in Ireland, less than 5% of priests were ever accused, never mind convicted of any wrongdoing. First, take a sense of proportion. Second, ask yourself, is this unique to the Catholic Church? It certainly isn't. The Anglicans have a similar problem. So do other religious organizations. It's everywhere in the secular world. It's in children's homes, it's in scout groups, it's in teaching. It's everywhere you look, it is there. And it is a grave, grave sin. And it is a sin as well as being a secular crime. And it's very grave, but it is rife. And now you've got to ask yourself, if it is rife, why? And I can remember, I actually remember the big controversy that blew up in the late 70s and early 80s when a perfectly respectable organisation, the Council for Civil Liberties, which had perfectly respectable people running it, people like Patricia Hewitt and Harriet Harman, perfectly respectable organisation, actually allowed, hold on to your seats, actually allowed the paedophile information exchange to affiliate to it. Now why? Because of ignorance, because it was seen as an issue of libertarianism versus moral conservatism, rather than as an issue of child protection. It was the 1990s in this country before we actually got a sex offenders register. It was the 1990s, and I don't mean the early 90s either. And there was just a misunderstanding, and what the church thought was that if you detached a priest from the child, it would be like detaching a priest from a woman. You send them to a far distant parish and that's it, it's over. Well, it wouldn't be, of course, he'd just seek another child. But there was an absence of understanding which has grown. So therefore, I don't think that the Catholic Church is uniquely bad on this score at all. Supposing I did, supposing it was 95% of priests, supposing it was wholly unique to the Catholic Church and that it didn't exist anywhere else at all. Nevertheless, if what the Church teaches is true, that is what drew me to it. And so I would remain with it on the basis of its teaching.
Now to some sort of just general Catholic questions. Do you have a favourite saint or any favourite saints?
Well, now this is going to absolutely shock your audience, I'm afraid. But when I crossed to Catholicism, of course, you have to take a saint's name for confirmation purposes. And I very much wanted to remember somebody who is certainly not a saint at all and would never be recognised as such by the Catholics, which was Hugh Latimer, because he stood up for truth and he put his, he's comforted Ridley, who was dying with him in the flames. They were burnt at the stake for what they saw as truth. And I felt at the time that the Anglican Church, that we had no idea about putting truth first, and I wanted to honour somebody. So I said, right, I want to take the confirmation name Hugh, but I do realise I can't take it after Hugh Latimer, even if that's what I'm actually doing. And the priest said, okay, I'll look up a Hugh for you. So he found me Hugh of Lincoln. But actually, if I would have a favourite saint, I'm going to say St. Augustine, because he was so completely human. So completely human. Teresa of Avila, oh God, if this is how you treat your friends, no wonder you haven't got many of them. People who are human and are not just total, just so totally good that you feel you could never reach such a standard. I like human saints. I like St. Augustine. I like Teresa of Avila. I like human saints.
Absolutely. You could look at those two saints you mentioned and think, that could be me. Maybe not for everyone St. Augustine, but certainly the thing that Teresa of Avila said, a lot of people could feel that way, couldn't they?
Absolutely. I mean, you and I probably feel that way several times a day, when we're standing up for what is right and something's going wrong and we think, what are you doing up there? And I felt that all the way through the big pro-life campaigns of the late 80s and early 90s, which are now distant memories to most people. But in those big pro-life campaigns, so much effort, so much prayer, so much fasting was put into it. And then in the end, we didn't get the parliamentary result that we wanted. And you're very tempted to say, what's the point in carrying on? But I think we need to remember the other Teresa, St. Teresa of Calcutta, who simply said, we're not called upon to succeed, we're called upon faithfully to try.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other question I want to ask you is in relation to prayer. So again, similarly to the saints, do you have any particular prayers you like to pray? Do you pray specific prayers that we kind of are taught in the Catholic Church, or do you prefer to just kind of say your own prayers?
No, I just talk to him.
Yeah.
I just talk to him.
So no particular Catholic prayers.
I know. So I wouldn't, for example, I very rarely, not never, but I certainly very rarely would pray the Lord's Prayer at home. That is something I pray in church every week, because it's a formal prayer. And although I'll sometimes look through a book and think, oh, that's a nice prayer, let's make that. Or the church will hand something out to pray particularly for priests or to pray for something else or whatever it might be. And I think, yes, I'll do that, and I'll take those words. But generally, in my sort of ordinary practice, I just talk to him. I don't follow a formal pattern. That's probably my evangelical upbringing screaming out. Yeah.
Okay. And I have one final question, and it kind of relates to your career as a politician. Obviously, in your time as a politician, I think you weren't really afraid to show your social conservatism. That was whether, in your Anglican days and in your Catholic days, do you feel that now for politicians who are very socially conservative, and that might be based on their faith as well, it's actually harder to come out with that and be very public with that? I remember once I saw a few years ago, like an interview with Jacob Rees-Mogg. He was being kind of hounded about the issue of gay marriage and the issue of abortion. And he actually, I felt, held his own quite well. He said, look, he follows the teaching of the Catholic Church, but you felt the tension of, like, a lot of people might have cracked under that pressure and just gone, oh, look, it's my personal view, and I, you can do what you like. Do you feel it's hard now to show that?
It's certainly harder now because of social media. It's much harder than it was. But I never took the positions I took merely because I was first an Anglican and then a Catholic. As I said, I went through a period of agnosticism. In the whole of that time, I never, ever deviated from my views on abortion. Never. Because to me, the issue, even if I had been completely irreligious all my life, the issue of the protection of the unborn child in the womb, which is the weakest member of the human race, would still, very much determine my views on that issue. So, unlike Rees-Mogg, I've never said or rarely said in terms, I do this because this is what the church teaches. I say I do this because I believe this.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm all for explaining what the church teaches, but simply to say, oh, well, to make it sound as if you've got no choice. I'd much rather say, I believe what the church teaches. I believe it. I don't just follow it. I believe it.
Yeah, that almost sounds like when you did join the Catholic Church, a lot of those teachings you looked at and thought, this is what I believe. This agrees with what I've always felt inside anyway.
Oh, yes. I mean, I've always said, people often say to me, am I pro-life? Or they assume I'm pro-life because I'm Catholic. And I say, no, I'm probably Catholic because I was pro-life. Because it was during those big pro-life campaigns that I came into contact with Catholicism on a scale that I hadn't done since I was 18. I'd had virtually nothing to do with the Catholic Church. And then I suddenly came into contact with it again. And the Cardinal Hume at the time, was giving huge support to us. And so I came back into contact with the Catholic Church, and it all grew from there.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, Anne, well, that was my final question. I want to thank you very much for spending some time with me today. Is there anywhere that you would like viewers to be sent? Is there any website you want to look at or anything like that?
No, I don't think so. They can always look at my website if they want to, but okay. No, there's nothing I think I would particularly direct them towards, except when Lent comes around again, and I know it's a few months off. When Lent comes around again, do remember that very remarkable book by Frank Morrison, Who Moved the Stone? I reread it every Lent, and it's well worth it, and it's very faith affirming. The other thing I say to people is, if you want to see a God at work, watch Hacksaw Ridge, which is not about a Catholic, it's about a Seventh-day Adventist. He stood up for his truth, which was he was a pacifist in the time of war, but he went out as a medic, as a combat medic. He didn't fight, but he was a medic. And he rescued 75 men. And each time he did it one by one. And each time he prayed to God, just let me get one more. He didn't stand there and say, when we pray for world peace, we want all these big things. He didn't say, let me get all those men out, Lord. He said every time, one more. And every time he got one to safety, he went back in saying, please, Lord, one more. I think that is one of the most faith-affirming films I've ever seen.
There we go. Well, thank you very much, Anne. So those two things, I'll put them in the description as well, so people can look into that. Ann Widdecombe, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for the chat. And I wish you a wonderful rest of your day.
And you, and all your readers, all your listeners, viewers, whatever they are these days. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.